Welcome back to another episode of Off Topic. So excited to be seated here with our lovely hosts. We have our goddess extraordinaire, of course, in the house with us today. Hello, India. Good morning.
Hello, Kylie.
How are you doing?
I'm feeling great.
And of course, not to exclude Jim, who has done a beautiful job at, just being here and tolerating our shenanigans. Good morning, Jim. How are you feeling today?
Good morning, Kylie. Good morning, India.
I see you're rocking your beautiful green tie-dye. Does this have anything to do with the concurrent theme of monies and economy?
No, but we're near solstice, so that's what I'm recognizing.
Oh, I love that. So let's go ahead and introduce the topic for today's episode, which I'm sure we will stick to concretely because that's our jam today and always
On off topic,
on
yes.
off topic. We're going to be talking about books. So each of us has brought a book that we would like to talk about, and who wants to show and tell first?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll
Yeah.
get started.
Yeah,
I
get
brought an
started.
amazing book called Here, Here. And it's written by Lee Garland and Arnie Buss, or Boos, not sure. I'll have to have him on the show and interview him, and then I'll find out.
I love that.
And this book is about engaging with our aware, loving heart, effective communication. And this is based on the work of Selwa Said, who was on the Monterey Peninsula, just an incredible thought leader for her entire life. She passed away a few years ago in her 90s. And she taught effective communication courses to companies and to individuals and to small groups, and all kinds of organizations would bring her in when they were having a breakdown in communication, and she would teach effective communication classes. The thing about her communication courses were that it was for creating and building relationships. So it wasn't for people who didn't want to have a relationship. So if it was for it wasn't necessarily for
So
how
not
to get
therapy, right? Is we're not forcing someone to go to the therapist and sit down and talk to you. This is I need to build bridges. How do I do that? Here's the book.
right. And if
she
you don't
gives
like
the
the person,
tools.
you don't need to build a bridge. So right. So this is for relationships that you want to have and that you want to build. So and it's interesting because it was a movement that grew out of the 60s. And so it was like the non-violent communication, man. So
Why do you have quotations?
Well, the book has been great, and when we got married, the wedding gift to ourselves was to take Selwa's class in communications, and we got ourselves a massage table.
Ooh.
We figured mind and body at the very beginning of the relationship, but taking the class and realizing how incredible, if you have a strategy of communication, is that this is what should be taught in junior high and high school. I mean, this is cradle to grave talent and skills that you need. Some people are naturally talented. They're good listeners. They reflect back. But there were all those books that were like Getting to Yes and all that. And that's very much so in this book. There's strategies of how to speak. Basically, Selwa was great about her book is that it's high emotion situations. When you come upon, this isn't something to do just in everyday speak, even though you can, but it's like if you are dealing with somebody who's upset, this is
right. And it's also when you're upset, how to get your needs met without upsetting anyone else. So communication for when you're talking, and also these communication skills are also the same ones that are used in hostage negotiations or that kind of thing. So all the way from that kind of extreme situation to how to get along with a coworker, and it's effective on all those levels. But communication is very separated, and they make it very clear in the book whether you are listening and you're actively listening and reflecting back to the person and talking them down, or are you trying to get your needs met? And so when you're listening, you're always using the pronoun you. So for example, it would be, like, so you've really had it with this situation or whatever. And then the person can say, yes, I'm so frustrated, or that kind of thing.
I love it. It's the type of language around centering the person who you're supposed to be actively listening to. Um, does she talk or touch upon nonverbal communication at all in her book?
Yes, it's actually not her book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She passed away. She had a syllabus for her course that was like 4 pages. But these are students of hers and also friends of hers
and teachers of her
and
method.
now they teach her, and they teach her method. And so these are her she was their mentor. So
I
they're
need
mentees.
to brush up on my active listening, because I was like, oh yes, her thoughts and theories and her book. It is not her book, it is her students' book, but heavily influenced because
Right.
she is their seafood.
Right. And they are
mentor.
currently teaching her seminars and her method. Yes. And it's interesting because I've read a lot of different communication books. There's one excellent communication book called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk, which was a great book. But when you took the Selwa course, she was at this other level of really fine-tuning statements so that nothing is triggering. And so I hear how you're feeling. You would never mix I and you when you're listening. When you're listening, it's all, you're listening to the other person, and it's the other person's emotion, and that you're reflecting back to them. And never, so you would never say the word I when you're listening.
That sounds like a lot of psychological intuition and observation, as well as, you know, I feel like that's a quick connection to be able to process all of that, which is why we should appreciate and pay our therapists more, by the way. just a little tidbit in there, but to actively listen to someone, perceive their emotions, and then also the words that they're saying, and then to do like a quick psychologically, what are your needs in this one? What are you communicating? And then try to package that back. So you're just like, okay, is this the right, am I getting your gist correctly?
And if
That's
you don't,
powerful.
it's so powerful. And if you don't get somebody's gist correctly, that's okay. You're still trying and you're listening, and they can go, no, what I mean is this. And then you get another shot. Because if you're truly, they call it tracking. If you're truly tracking someone's emotions, then, and it's really such a powerful tool, because when somebody else is upset, as the listener, you don't own it. And one of the things that they say in the book that I just thought was so revelatory was, when someone's upsetness comes your way, because you're never owning the person's upsetness. It's just sometimes somebody has a problem. It's completely contained within them. And that's why when you track their emotion, it's you. You're just beyond upset. You're frustrated. You're really sad today. You know, things like that. It's all at the other person. So it's also training in boundaries. And so I haven't actually finished the book. And so the second part of the book is then how to get your needs met. And that's with an impact statement. And that I haven't practiced.
Yeah, if you are emotional about something, then this is how to present what you want out of a situation. But India's also found that Selwa, her strategy of communication is something you can use on yourself. So if you find yourself in an emotional state, then you can start to track yourself and find out what it is that really is bothering you, rather than, you know, often we displace, you know, and we scapegoat and we do all that thing. We have so many mental tricks to not be honest with ourselves, that it's really great to have a strategy to be honest.
And then if I'm having a problem that I want to express to someone else, I can express what I need in this impact statement. And the pronoun for an impact statement is I. You know, I'm having a difficult time walking through the room when there are clothes on the floor. But
has somebody been like listening to my internal dialogue? I wake up, and it is funny because it is those things of, you know, we self-process first, and decide, okay, what is at least I do, what is the most effective way I can communicate that I am displeased at my current surroundings without coming off like it's a slap in the face. And also, because nobody's going to be motivated to make those changes if they feel like it's an attack or if they feel like you're belittling them or making a moral statement. I think also just the implications of a conversation automatically being a fight is one that's sometimes hard to avoid, especially in couples and in shared living spaces, not even romantic, just shared living spaces, because then people want to feel like, they have autonomy.
If everyone had these skills, then even when you're in a state that you can't put into practice the skills that then the person around you could. And I think that that's, for moving forward as humanity's evolution, this communication is a really important thing. And one of the things that we analyzed what it is that works about it is that when a person's in an emotional state, you don't ask them a question, you say a statement, and they basically can agree or disagree with it. And by that, they know that you're engaging them. And another thing is that, the way that languages are structured is that a lot of languages and honor cultures, they don't include the subject. They'll state what happened, but it's no finger pointing of who did what. And I think that that's really important. I think language should be structured around relationship building. I think that that's really important rather than getting to blame placing.
So we've spoken.
There's no blaming.
No blaming.
There's no
There's no blaming in this.
I think
Sure.
in English, I think we have a very we're very finger pointy in our language. And I think that that's, we're really into cause and effect. And that's a lot of placing who caused it. And in other cultures, you can speak where you just roll the subject into the verb. And so you don't talk about who caused it. You just talk about what happened.
So does it touch on anything in there with the idea that logic and emotion are separate and disconnected in communication, especially from a heart space?
Well, in a way, because it says when you make an impact statement, you're asking for change, and it says that you should be like a camera, just observing the situation. So it should be basically free of emotion. Here's
Spock would be proud.
Yes. So here's an impact statement. Rather than saying there are clothes strewn all over the floor, this place is a mess, I want it cleaned up, right?
Now.
That sounds really triggering, very blamey. And instead, what could be said would be very dispassionate, and as though a camera were just recording the situation. It would be, there are clothes on the floor. I find myself having to pick them up. Or I find myself picking up clothes. No, see, I said it wrong. I find myself having to pick. See, Selwa had this fine-tuned down to a science where all triggers are taken out. So,
but it also gives space for the person to say, hey, the clothes are on the floor because my back hurts and I'm not able to do it. So, I mean, you know what I mean? It gives space for the person to respond rather than...
It gives space for the person to solve the problem in whatever way they would like to solve it. So you don't say what you want. You just say how it's affecting you and how you need it to change. And it's up to them how they want to take that or where they want to go from there. So let me try again. There are clothes on the floor. I find myself picking up the clothes. I'd like the floor kept clear. Done. So
that puts onus on whoever is actively listening to come up with their own solution to a problem that has just been presented without taking away autonomy and without saying, I don't think that you're capable of doing these things and I need them done my way or the highway. Jimmy, I see you leaning.
No, I'm just completely agreeing.
No, that's exactly right, Kyle. That is a perfect description. Yeah. Exactly.
I think a lot about thinking, and I know that I have a thought stream, and I know that lots of times I'm audience to my thought stream, so that I can actually just kind of track myself and see where I'm at. But I also know that if I'm ever in an emotional state, then I'm married to my thought stream, and I don't really can't separate myself from it. I'm, my emotions are in the driver's seat. But most of the time I can just like walk around and go, huh, I just thought about that. Thoughts come across your mind. They're not all good. You don't have, you don't have to act on every thought. It's just like your thoughts are suggestion to your intellect. Like you have a separate, you aren't your thoughts. You know what I mean? You are the thoughts you act upon, or you're the thoughts that you value.
I do love that.
So you
are
can
not
pick
your
and
thoughts.
choose from your own thoughts. You do your greatest hits of your own thoughts, or which ones. But that's why communication, selling, things like that is really teaching you to be in the driver's seat of your thought stream. I really thought it was incredible because in my mind, when you learn the SELA skills, you're like a step ahead of the moment. Like everybody else is in the present, but you actually have a strategy of like where you're going to take the conversation and how it's going to play out. And I just think that, everybody should be one step ahead of themselves.
Well, and it's a safety issue, is that if you know how to talk somebody down, that's incredibly powerful for safety. I actually was taking SELA's course the first time when I was 19, and I was bartending. And a guy came up and pulled a knife out and told me that he was going to stab the bouncer because the bouncer was not allowing him to go in and out of the bar. And I just said, you are so upset.
You are having a moment.
And he was like, I am. And he just went off. And he went on and on about how upset he was. And I said, this is unacceptable to you. Because you're supposed to kind of match the energy, and he was ready to stab somebody. So I had to meet that energy a bit. And he took the knife and he stabbed it into the bar. And I calmly went over and I called 911. And the police came and arrested him for vandalism because he had stabbed a knife into the bar. And I don't know if I saved the bouncer's life, but perhaps,
Yeah, we will take a stabbed bar over a stabbed bouncer any day.
And the bouncer was a sweetheart, like the nicest guy in the world. So and it was just an amazing thing to have happen because I was actually taking her course during the day and then bartending at night. So I had a really high stakes first chance to use them.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
And a fertile environment to utilize the skills immediately, Yeah, because you'll find high emotions around the bar.
But I've just been thinking about just in general about communication and why communication is so incredibly important to human beings. And
like it'll stop war.
Right.
You get a negotiator in there. You say, oh, we have a hostage situation. Who do you call? The negotiator. We just watched the Netflix special on Waco, and the people who were talking to Koresh, they were talking him down, and the other guys were like, we're going to get in there with a tank and run over his favorite car, as if that was going to de-escalate the situation. And once you know that the communication skills, the power of them, you're just like, oh my God, if they'd have just gotten all the crazy, macho guys out of there, then you would have had these other guys just talk him down. He would have felt heard,
But why?
It works.
Why as humans do we need to feel heard? Like,
right.
Isn't that interesting? Because we are a pack animal.
We're a chatty herd animal. We're like turning to the people next to us all the time and go, do I look okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you think the way I do? I mean, we're very much other oriented in that we need to know what other people think. And if they agree with us, and if they don't agree, I mean, look, Facebook is an experiment, is that somebody says, I agree with you fully, and you're just like, you love it. You put a heart there. And somebody says, I totally disagree with you. And you go, okay, I'm going to spend the next 6 hours talking to you.
I mean, it's funny also that you bring that up because just bringing in a social media aspect, the type of engagement skyrockets when you're just looking algorithmically with how people engage with materials. You're more likely to engage with something that you disagree with. It sparks a passionate side of you where you feel like you have to defend your position, defend even possibly like your right to exist, and whether or not that extends beyond like a personal argument to a governmental structure. I feel like these can be traits that have helped us survive, making sure that our needs are met and that we are heard in the herd, as it were. So yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating.
Well, there's attributional errors where you assume someone is doing something intentionally when they're not, and that's also called a narcissistic injury, is that you think it was being done to you in particular when it wasn't. And like they say, oh, that person has a chip on their shoulder, and some people are very sensitive to that. Well, we don't have the skills to talk to somebody like that. If you went through public school and private school or whatever and had no communications classes, then you're just kind of winging it, And other people came from a home where maybe it was a dangerous situation and they learned to really control their speech. And there's other people that were in a situation where they could just say whatever they want. And if you get those people together, then they may not connect. Whereas if we had this common ground of understanding of like, look, people are going to perceive this way and that way. And
Well, the book here really shows how some of the things that we think are so universal, like, oh, I know how you feel, may a statement like that with an I and a you in the same sentence may not be as comforting as we thought, and also like in when someone dies, I'm so sorry is not necessarily the most comforting thing to say. Something like
you must be really sad.
or not must be. She would
Oh.
take that out. She'd just say, "You're really gonna miss them." Yeah, doesn't that land?
That lands really well. And I
Mhm.
think that's something that I do subconsciously, which is
Mhm.
kind of interesting when communicating with people with grief, because I have been around a lot of death just in my everyday life. And I have found that one of the most effective things to do is to remove yourself from the situation. People who are grieving don't need the extra emotional burden of having to feel like they need to now maintain a semblance of normalcy for you.
No,
So
don't be
yeah, don't
sorry.
be sorry.
I'm
It's okay.
okay.
I'm okay. And it's just like, why do we
Mhm.
always do that?
Mhm.
And so when you take the emotional burden off someone by not centering yourself, it is a
Mhm.
literal weight that's lifted. You're giving someone space. And that idea of like you're giving someone space.
Mhm.
That's interesting because,
And permission. You're giving them
yeah.
permission to feel their feelings, to be sad. It's okay.
And one of the things that I just learned about was a thing called trauma dumping. And it's when a person comes up to you and tells you whatever trauma it is. And it was presented more of like, that's not okay for people to do that. You know what I mean? Rather than we should be given the skills of like, if someone's going to come up to you and say, look, I've just been through all this stuff that has no relevance to you, but it's where I'm at and I can't escape. I'm in a mental loop. And it would just be incredible to have these go-to strategies of like how you make that person feel heard and let them work through what it is so that you set them out on a better course even in their own life. So they walk away and they're like, God, thankfully I trauma dumped on that person and that person had the skills to listen.
We were waiting to get some shots at CVS, and there was a woman with a cane who was very young, and she was getting whatever treatment at CVS. I don't know. She was picking up medication or something. And so we're all standing around for our medical appointment. And she just said, I got blown up. I got blown up in Iraq. They blew me up. And I said, wow, that is a lot. That's a lot to process. And she was like, it is. And then Jimmy was wondering why this woman was talking to me for 20 minutes. He was like, what? What was she going on and on about? I said,
It's the tie dye.
I said,
it's the tie dye.
Yeah.
she got blown up
She
in
got blown up.
Iraq,
Yeah.
and it was actually, I think I did okay with her. She had a lot that she wanted to express. I couldn't take her pain away. She was in a lot of pain. She had lost vertebrae and ribs and, things. And I hadn't read Selwa's book. Well, Selwa's student's book yet. But I just sort of had that in my mind from having her courses when I was younger. And I was just glad that that was something I could do for somebody that was hurting.
So, in terms of the trauma dumping aspect, did you feel that that was inappropriate or did you feel shocked? Did you feel burdened
No.
by that moment?
No.
We're never in a hurry. So, and, you know, we really engage people.
I felt like there's a fellow human that
Yeah.
is trying to process something so overwhelming and intense. And I felt really grateful that I was able to help in any small way, actually. That's me.
You know, being a crafter and having a booth is that I call it, quote unquote, being open to the public. And open to the public means that everybody's going to walk in. And I mean, I had a guy who just came in the other day and he's stage 4 lung cancer. And then he told me, I just got him to tell me basically all the times in his life that he's almost died. And so I said, well, you know, you really sound like some kind of cat. And it sounds like you're only on like life number 7. So, you know, this may be just life number 8. I mean, you sound like a very hard person to kill. So, you know what I mean? But he was there and he just wanted to talk, you know, and he didn't buy anything, you know, and that was the thing. But there's just this, you engage people and you let them expel what they have to, and you try to set them, because I mean, you know, this is our responsibility as part of the human, you know, population, is that we all need each other. Humans do not do well in isolation, and you can be surrounded by a lot of people and feel very isolated until you run upon someone who actually sits them down and listens to you. And you don't even have to have an experience that parallels theirs. You just have to let them tell their truth, you know?
I would say Here is a great book for how to be a decent human being.
Yeah, decent human being training. That's,
I love that.
you know.
So, on our next roundup of decent human being training, because I feel like books are part of that. You know, we get a lot of our education because we only have the one life and we can only be exposed to so many different types of life at once. So books help us along the way to gain some of that exposure, and help us become more fulfilled beings. Jim, what's on your reading list to help
On
us
my
along
reading
on this
list
path?
is a book that changed my life. It was called The Conduct of Life by Lewis Mumford. And I never pleasure read a book until I was 23 years old. So I got through junior high, high school, and even college just reading what was assigned reading. And so I was not a very fast reader. And when I first opened my first book, I mean, I read 3 pages and I was physically and mentally exhausted. And what I realized was that it was really hard to retain what I read. And so from that moment on, I used a yellow pen. And everything that I found important in a book, I would yellow pen. Because there's one thing of like, this is the greatest book I ever read. And then you go get that book and you can't find the page that you want to tell the people. But if you yellow pen it and you start, and then there were those who worship books are like, oh my God, you've destroyed the book. And I'm like, no, this book is mine. I'm never giving it up. This is why I have it. And so I dedicated myself to reading books, and I would read 30 nonfiction books a year. I tried to read 3 a month, and I was able to pull that off for like over 15 to 20 years. So I've read like 450 to 600 books. But this book called The Conduct of Life by Lewis Mumford was written in 1951. And after World War II and the nuclear bombs being dropped and stuff, he really felt like, you know, he won all the philosophical awards around the world. But it was how to structure a society to produce psychologically healthy and fully developed human beings. And to me, it was revelatory because it was how you can set up a social environment to take you from cradle to grave. And he had like all kinds of proposals. And it's so funny because I just went back and read the book again and found out that all the things I thought kind of like maybe I had originated were actually seeded from his original book.
And
But
I also wanted just to add a little tack on in there. You said you were not reading books for pleasure. So then what was the motivation for you in those books? And did that not fuel a passion? Did they become pleasurable later?
Oh, yeah. But the thing is that I don't read fiction because I don't think it's real. I think it's all made up. So I read nonfiction, and just being the person that I am, it became really important. I do economic history, I do psychology, I do persuasion, propaganda, and I really like to find civil servants who, like everybody in FDR's cabinet, wrote a book. So I read that, and so people will say, "Oh, have you read Kerouac?" or "Have you read?" And I haven't. And in fact, I'd be more likely to read a book about them, written by someone else, than to actually read their book. So I know that's bizarre. I like very, very dry writing. I like it factual. There was a man, James Landis. He invented the Federal Commission, which is a quasi-judicial legislative body, and that was how that did the Securities Exchange Commission. I would read a book on the Federal Trade Commission, on the Interstate Commerce Commission. I mean, I would go with the whole history of any of that. What was really fun was I used to, drive around from town to town, and I would always drive right into town, and I'd find their used bookstore, and I'd go right over to their economic history section, which would be maybe no books, so I could like get in and out of a store because my section of the store is very small. But I, found incredible philosophers, incredible regional planners, things like that. So that's the kind of book that I really like.
Oh, and one of my favorite stories about Jimmy and his love for Lewis Mumford is that it turned out Jimmy had this incredible passion for Lewis Mumford and read all of his books. I have tried to read his books. They are very hard to penetrate. Like, that is a very hard book to read. But it turns out that Lewis Mumford came and gave a speech in Jimmy's hometown, and that Jimmy actually grew up in a town that was inspired by Lewis Mumford and designed based on his recommendations. And Jimmy didn't know that. I mean,
yeah, I was well into my Lewis Mumford studying, and he had been born in New York City and had seen how the city had grown. And so he was into garden cities, and it was like I grew up near Sacramento, so it's very flat. And he said, like, you don't make it a grid pattern because people just drive fast. He says you make sure that all the roads are curved. And then he said that there'd be important to have green belts. And behind the rows of houses, there were green belts because he wanted to separate pedestrian traffic from motorized vehicles. Because he said, why would you walk next to the worst air quality around? And he was all into like making cars take a back seat. He was one of those people that was like, why are we putting highways through the center of a city? And he was even showing how like railroads were allowed to go through the center of the city, and that would disrupt traffic. And that also then you'd have the railway yard there, which was just, rusty stuff, minerals, dirt, and stuff like that. He was all about like highways should go around cities. And if you want to go to the city, then you take an off-ramp and go to the city. And as we know, going through LA, I don't want to go to LA, but I'm stuck in LA because there's no road around LA, and, a subway will move 300,000 people in a day, and a road has a capacity to move 30,000 people in a day. So there's been all these ways that we could have planned this out a lot better.
He was so far ahead of his time writing about this in the 40s and 50s?
Yeah, that's why I look at the suburban reformation is that, why don't we dig up the roads in the suburbs and turn it into play space? I mean, there's a potential killing field in front of everybody's house. That's why kids aren't allowed to play in the street. And, I actually thought the other day, like, look at your neighborhood and think if you took all the cars in your neighborhood and you put them in a parking lot, how embarrassing it would be about how many cars there are per capita there. And then think that you gave your driveway space to your car, you gave your garage to your car, you gave the road that no one's on most of the day to the car. I mean, you've given up so much of your potential area to develop for theater, for museums, for commerce, all that stuff. And it's all been sacrificed just for that, for the car,
Well,
for you to drive up to your front door. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Oh, the thing I really like about Lewis Mumford was he talked about the structure of a city being these rings where you would have like families with children in the center.
Near the
And
parks.
near the
and
parks.
old people should be living
And then you would have
closest.
the elderly in the next ring, so that the elderly can enjoy seeing the children, and then have the cars on the ring outside of that. So there would be all this priority given to pedestrians, to children, to the elderly. And you see that in Europe.
Yeah.
you know.
Well, he wrote one of his first books that made him famous was The City in History. And, being born in 1895, he was there when they started to uncover a lot of archaeology of the old cities. And he was able to, as a city planner, look if today we'd given pedestrians priority, how would you set out a city? And he was all like, look, their amphitheater where all their plays would take place and all their speakers would have was 45-minute walk from their dormitories where everybody slept. And he said, can you imagine the conversations that took place in that 45-minute walk from having watched some event? He says, and now everybody just walks to the parking lot, hops in their car, and drives home. So you're not facilitating personal relationships. You're not facilitating community involvement if you give everybody these vehicles to drive. It's really community killers is what cars are.
I really love that we've come across this topic because it is another facet of capitalism that
Mhm.
I didn't really think about in terms of city planning. And, for me, working in corporate spaces, it's more immediate when I started to see shifts to like cubicles, where people are putting up temporary offices. And especially now when people are trying to get engagement and trying to get workers to come back to the office, and they're offering things like chair massage, which is where I come in. I'm like, I can tell, like, oh, they're bribing you back to the office, huh? And seeing now that they're experimenting with open layouts again, to where
Mm.
they're taking down the walls so you can see your coworkers, so you can have more engagement. And that is always proven to be more effective as a business model.
Mhm.
And so I'm just wondering when capitalism will then like turn the light bulb moment on and go, okay, like at a certain point, we're going to reach, a level where human beings are no longer going to want to engage at all
Yeah,
with this
Mhm.
system.
he promoted the good life rather than the goods life. And he said the goods life. And, I mean, look at all the public property that we could share. Like I said, our communities, we don't need that many cars. If you had a lot full of cars and you just came and checked one out, what if there was, electric golf carts that took you from your house to the parking lot where you got a car, and that you began to have a relationship with the people who drove you? I mean, we have to facilitate this humanity coming together, this isolation of the screen inside your TV, watching TV. We need community centers. We have to get people out the front door and mixing together because people are pretty paranoid in isolation. And once you start getting out in public, you find out how much you have in common with other people. And that's why if you get out in public and you have these communication skills, then I mean, your life is going to be this reward. It's rewarding to think, wow, I just had a great conversation with somebody.
Mhm.
You know, so
Plus, I think we don't often realize in our efforts to each of us have everything and be our own isolated planets that we are then literally taking food away from people who could be working to fulfilling some of those things that we've just decided that we need to be hyper independent about. Like you were
Mhm.
saying, who would drive the golf cart? You start talking to the people who are living and working around you locally, and I think we had kind of touched on this before with, implementing AI for things and the fact that it is also
Mhm.
eliminating jobs. And then when you talk about city planning, using railroads, and then we are giving jobs, and we've always
Mhm.
seen this
Mhm.
historically. When we're doing well economically, it's because we created spaces where people have to depend on one another, and we're creating more jobs. We're creating an economy, and we're doing it with local flair.
Mhm.
Well,
I was looking up. I saw this great show that was questioning why do we have cars and why do we have cars in our communities. It was really great, and so I decided to Google like how many people die in car accidents just in the U.S. alone, and it was shock. It's so much more than gun deaths. It's like around 50,000 people die in car accidents just in the United States. 50,000. I
like,
think I think gun deaths are around 30,000, and we're really up in arms, and we really want to change that, as we should. And yet there's no discussion of this basic human sacrifice to this poison spewing vehicle?
So one of the perks of having a partner who's a mechanic, and because I didn't really pay attention to, the cars that I drove, whether or not it had stock parts in it, and then all of a sudden you get with somebody who really understands that the perils of going with a
Mm-hmm.
stock part because they are quite literally designed to fail,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding the limits mechanically for when they're designed to fail really opens your eyes to other implications of that, and the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you can have a book that will talk about car deaths, but where's the other um, novel that should come along with it that talks about what parts go out when and why.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
Right,
and
so
Ralph Nader wrote the book Unsafe at Any Speed.
unsafe at any speed.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that we have this whole instant gratification, and we have this whole need for cars to drive faster. And personally, I've done enough driving in my life that I would really like to be able to be on a train and reading a book. I would like to be relieved of the job of like steering and making sure, and having the insurance. I mean, every time you back up, it's a high stakes situation. Like, my chances of dying go way up as soon as I hop in a car compared to when I'm just walking down the street. I mean, if there's no cars on the sidewalk.
One thing I'm curious about is when they talk about deaths in car accidents, I wonder if they're including pedestrians. Because I've heard lately that pedestrian deaths with cell phones are at an all-time high. So it's the driver may be on a cell phone, and also the pedestrian may be looking at a phone while crossing the street. And I saw this show on YouTube all about cars, and it was really interesting because they said that when cars came out, it was a controversy. Like, are we going to keep these things? They create smog. They're running over kids, because when cars first came out, they were running over a lot of people. People didn't know how to deal with it. So rather than limiting cars in places where children were walking, they came up with this concept of the jaywalker.
Right. I love that you have said, when we had cars, they started running over people. Like, instead of we started running over people. Human beings started running over
But
people.
it was a
Yeah, right.
but
And we
the
are
cars were
still
status.
right, and we are still running over people. So yeah, so they came up with this whole PR thing about jaywalker. So the blame and the onus was on the walker, the victim of the car, and it removed the culpability of the driver and this new technology that was not working. It was
New
unsafe.
technology, but also I love now that in our attempts to correct the fallacy and like clear flaws with having, human beings who come along with, just our human beingness and our all myriad of issues with sight and perception and distraction, where we had I wouldn't say a perfectly working system, but we had a system in place to do that in terms of transportation. We have trains and rails and things like that. And now, instead of going back and figuring out how to perfect those, we've instead now tried to go into an even further issue with the vehicles and make them self-driving.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
gotten.
I know, ridiculous.
Why would we do
Yes.
that?
Oh, I just wanted to finish my jaywalking
Yes,
thought.
finish your jaywalking thought, please.
So, jaywalking was, according to this YouTube show, which you can't question
No.
those are always true. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that jay was a synonym for hick, and so it was actually a classist slur to call somebody a jaywalker. Like, look at this hick who doesn't know how to dodge a car. Think about that. And
That's wild. I was expecting some interesting like acronym of just another walker or something.
Well,
Yeah.
there's the whole idea of they're on the wrong side of the track, or on this side of this road. That's the neighborhoods you can't go to. I mean, the car has come in and really ruined a lot. Oftentimes online, they'll ask the question of what's the worst thing that humans have ever invented.
And I always put cars and get no likes. And I
Aw.
always think, oh, everybody's going to love this. I'm going to put cars are the worst invention ever. And I'm going to get 1,000 likes. and people are
No.
going to vote it to the top.
They want flying cars.
I know.
So you can crash in
Mm.
space.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people about the, elimination of cars, and people are just like, people never give up their car, and the car is their identity, and blah blah blah, and all this stuff, and kind of this real dysfunctional relationship people have with their cars. I've always seen it as get me from point A to point B, and it's just interesting that the car companies and the oil industry and the amount of money that's been made and the wars that have been fought and the governments that have been corrupted, and it's amazing, and the destruction of our communities is that you don't know your neighborhood and you don't know everybody really close because of your car. If you were all out in front of your houses walking to home and to work and stuff like that, you would have much closer relationships. There's so much that you've lost, and you don't realize that the car has taken away. Every kid grows up with don't run in the street, you'll get killed by a car. Well, I mean, who cares? Cars are more important than safe play space for children. Cars are more important than community gardens. Cars are more important than community centers. Cars are more important than community theater. Cars are more important than everything.
Clean
Nothing
air,
matters.
clean water.
Only cars matter.
Cars are more important than
if
50,000
humanity
people's
if
lives.
humanity gets eliminated and there's running cars on the planet, then that's the goal of these car lovers. And I've just gotten to the point that it's ridiculous. Look at the amount of money people are spending, the insurance. I mean, people are, you scratched my car, I mean, it's
Road
just
rage,
ridiculous.
road rage, yeah.
Rage. I mean,
It is my firm belief that if women had equal power, that the car would never have been invented. I think that this contraption came along that spewed poisonous gas and ran over children, and we would just, I think that they just would have gone, well, that's a neat invention.
well, there's that super,
But too bad we can't have those around.
that's super
I think it
famous.
would just be a sport. I think it would just
Yeah.
be NASCAR. It'd be like, okay,
Yeah.
play with
Mhm,
your
mhm,
tracks.
Mhm.
but
Or
look-
perhaps like big delivery vehicles.
Yeah.
Occasionally.
Have they
or something.
seen Mr. Toad, and his
Yeah.
eyes, and he
Aw.
goes crazy because he gets the car,
And that was
and he alienates everyone in his community because he's like, he doesn't care about people. He just cares about his car.
well, that's what Mr. Toad, The Wind in the Willows, the author, talking about books, the author of Wind in the Willows was not a fan of cars, and that's why he had Toad be this character who was just insane about the car, and he was willing to give up every aspect of his life to the car.
I think everything that we have touched on today is very well represented in any doomsday film, any zombie outbreak film where people can't leave the city because everyone's trying to leave in their car.
Oh,
And they
right.
literally die inside their cars.
Mhm.
They can't exit. The cars are blocking the way. There's no way out. And all you're left with is this barricade of vehicles.
Mhm.
Well, look at the embarrassment of the SUV. I mean, we realized that we had an oil problem, and they started making bigger cars that get 5 miles to the gallon. I mean, it's a sad commentary, but it's like, Easter Island all over again. It's just like, what? The end is near. Let's do something. Let's be worse. Let's
I
figure out
thought
how we can
SUVs
bring.
were just for tax write-offs. I thought that's all it was. It was just
I
like,
thought-
I need to launder my money.
Mhm.
I mean, I need to find a good tax write-off, and
Why
I need
on
a
earth-
big metal weight to do it.
But why on earth, when you're like on the verge of starvation and you need every last tree to make canoes to go fishing, why on earth would the government give a tax break to people who are building giant heads?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I always looked at the
That's my SUV argument.
when the SUVs came out. I was like, oh, future homeless shelters. I see it's big enough for people to live in, because at that time living in your car wasn't that big a thing, and I thought, oh, because all of this is foreseeable. But Arnold Schwarzenegger has done a really big apology that he was really embarrassed that he was part of that whole Humvee movement, and that
Mhm.
how it's demasculinized everybody.
But
these
that's a
big cars.
very, very human thing. When humans are on the verge of a disaster, rather than beginning to conserve, it's been shown in studies over and over again, humans will consume more, and just be more destructive at a time when they should be. And that's the whole metaphor of the Easter Island that happened. And actually, the people on Easter Island would not have died had they had pulled back, and instead of using their very last trees to drag giant rocks to make monuments for their richest members on the island, if they had saved those trees for fishing, they totally would have survived because help was coming. There was ships. I think it was I forget who it was. Does anybody know? It was the Spanish. Some conquistadors of some type were coming in big ships with food on them, and so I think they just extincted themselves like 25 years shy, or maybe it was even 2 years shy. Like that's how the story goes.
I feel like we owe crabs an apology for all the times that we've been like, oh, you're just like crabs in a barrel. No, you're just like humans on a planet. This is what's happening. Why are we doing this?
So let me ask you, Kylie, what book have you brought to share with us all?
Oh, lovely transition.
Let's do a full circle here.
Full circle, quite literally. The book that I brought to share with everyone today is on death and dying. This is a wonderful piece by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And the subtitle for this is What the Dying Have to Teach Doctors, Nurses, Clergy, and Their Own Families. On Death and Dying is a culmination of her work interviewing patients in hospitals and people who are in home in various different settings and communities on their journey to death. And she's spoken to people of all ages. She interviews them. She has created a study and a collective of everyone's answers because she truly believes that we, as a collective whole, psychologically are more likely to turn away from even the concept of death subconsciously, consciously. She said, part of the most difficult part of her journey was actually getting her studies started, because she would go into hospitals and on every floor they would say, oh, there's no one dying on this floor. And she went to a hospital that had like 65 floors on it, and she was like, how could it be in a hospital with 65 floors that there's nobody dying in this building? And then it becomes, okay, so not only are people as individuals in denial about their own mortality, their own status, but as a system, we are systemically geared to not want to recognize the fact that death is a part of the natural order. And she spoke about it from the perspective of having the science of medicine versus the art of medicine, and bringing some of those humane aspects back. She also talks about the symbolic language that people use when they're in their last phases of life. And so she said, this is really, truly universal. There's these 3 languages. And she also talked about the different stages of grief. But it was the picture storytelling that really kind of caught my eye for this series, where she's also talking about people's inherent relationship to their own knowledge of death. So one of the prime examples would be when she was interviewing kids, and there was a boy who had been given like a week to live, and she had gone over some artwork that he had sent her. And in the artwork, he was like, there was like a tank, and it was like driving over a small child. And she was saying, this is something that everyone can relate to. It's so simple. He can't talk about, these huge complex ideas behind dying, but he can show you what he's feeling in that moment. And then there were other examples of, people being told that they were going to die and having a deep rooted belief that, no, I am not going to die. And then they being correct. And they lived for years later and then passed. But when she talked to children who had that happen to them, the pictures were different. And it was typically, there would be the symbolism of bombs dropping was used a lot in those instances. And it was the everyone else but me. So you would have a child draw bombs dropping out of the air, and it would be hitting everyone around them, but not them. And so that's like a clear indicator that, yes, they've been told by everyone else that it's inevitable, you're going to die, but they believe that they're not going to die. And it's clear in this photo, or it's clear in the drawing. Um, so that was something that was really fascinating to me, this very human phenomenon of dying and why we don't talk about it as much. I know we've all experienced death. This conversation really is coming full circle because it's something that we talked about a little earlier. Have you guys ever had an experience where you got to sit with someone who passed, and how did that moment make you feel?
It was very calm. It was a lot more normal than I thought it would be. I think in Western civilization, I mean, we talk about death so euphemistically, passing away, no longer with us. I mean,
the language.
Yeah, the language.
That's very us oriented rather than them.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because we aren't going to die, they're going to die. So,
and I sat with my mom as she died over like a 7-day period, and she was very much in denial the whole time. She kept saying, what I need to do is just, if I could just get a little stronger, or eat some food and get stronger. And I was like, wait, what? Like, we're not all on the same page. Like, you're dying. She was very much in denial about dying all the way up until when she did. And I was surprised about that, because I think in the movies, elders, this was my second intimate experience with somebody who was dying. But the other person who I was with who died was already nonverbal. So I didn't get to talk to him about how he felt about it. And he had been very aware that he was going to die and had made all the arrangements of how he wanted things handled. He and was not in denial at all. I think his death was a lot better.
I think one of the most pertinent pieces of this book is the role that we play as people who are going to continue living for those who are dying. And it is not, she said, part of the problem with some of our institutions is that we want to prolong life for as long as you can. And she was like, no, our goal, if we know definitively that someone is going to pass away, should be to make them comfortable and to have those heart-to-heart conversations and moments so that they can reach a point of peace, because it is inevitable. And because we don't talk about it, because everyone kind of walks around assuming that their death is going to be like an attack or an accident, they have a really hard time actually sitting with the thought that you could just grow old and you fall asleep and then one day you don't wake up. Every day we are expending energy, we are biological beings, our cells regenerate and things go wonky, and it is by design. And that's probably the most difficult struggle. And so it was a real eye-opener for being able to have the conversations with people when they need them to happen on their time, and to start preparing people to have those conversations and be there for those conversations, because what they have to teach you, she said, the perception of someone who's already at death's door is far greater than yours. They're looking back into time, kind of call back to the conversation we had earlier of, you want to be able to conversationally stay a step ahead. These people are miles ahead already.
Right.
And so you should listen.
Right. That's a perfect time for listening, huh?
With India's mom, I really find everybody fascinating. And I talked to her, and she had told me that when she was like 15 through 17, she had been a singer and she sang Hank Williams songs. And so I was able to go onto YouTube and I found the greatest hits of Hank Williams, and I calculated that she was born in 1937, so she'd have been 15 about 1955. So I found his album that was released in 1955, figuring that was and you know what? She sat there and she had very little energy, but she sang and she laughed, and I mean,
that was her last day that she was awake.
Yeah, and I was just like,
she was humming Hank Williams. It was really beautiful. It was. And full circle on her life, from what had made her the happiest at the beginning of her life, and then again at the very end.
and I'm doing that for my dad right now. Is I'm really interviewing him on his career and everything like that before anything. He's doing great right now, but he's 85 years old, and getting him back to his childhood aspects that he enjoyed, and then what his life story arc is, and it's amazing. He'd put it out of his mind. So and it's taken probably about 4 interviews to start to get really deep into. He was in the environmental movement through the 70s and worked for the state government, and so started with Fish and Game. And I don't know, you just got to ask these people. Everybody's interesting, and then I think that will help him and myself in the later stages of his life, to just remind him of that it's not the moment that we're having here in this barren institution and all the problems that are going forward. Is that you're still an interesting person, you still had a lot of life experience, and
you won't, and your life will be remembered.
and you'll be
Your
remembered.
accomplishments will be remembered.
And the other thing was that human beings and the burying of their dead and the ritualization of it is one of the things that they really say brings us into being. Consciousness is that we know we're going to die, and that's do other animals know that, or do they ritualize it or celebrate it? And
Just us and elephants, right?
well, they're actually showing that there were hominids that weren't Homo sapiens that were actually having graves and things like that 200,000 years before us. So this is not unique to us.
Well, this unbearable lightness of being, right? This knowledge in us as primates that we are going to die, and the uniqueness of that, because we don't talk about it much, especially in Western culture. One of the things about the Mexican culture is that death is very present.
Mm-hmm.
The celebration of death, the Catrina skull,
Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead. They really celebrate and get very intimate with death. And death in Mexico is so different than death in the U.S. And one of the things is that, having lived in Mexico, is we've seen a lot of dead bodies in Mexico. Never saw one in the U.S. So they have this belief. They leave people's bodies where they died for a long time.
For the family to come visit it and stuff.
And
so they don't
everything.
remove a dead body. They're like, hey, everybody, it's got I think a dead body's supposed to stay there for 24 hours.
Or something. But
Yeah.
if somebody gets hit by a car on the highway, which I think I've seen at least 3 people killed on the highway, because the highway goes through the center of town.
There's a circle.
Yeah, they're there. You pull up a stoplight and there's a person under a sheet, and then you go shopping and you come back 4 hours later, they're still there.
I love that you brought that up, because that is something that is talked about in the book as well, as how we address people after they've passed. And in Western cultures, it is make them look like they're sleeping. We paint people who have passed. We put makeup on them. We dress them up. We make it look as if the death has not occurred. Or we have this idea of wanting to be pretty enough to have an open casket. There was, because, we're talking about music also. I was like, Nirvana was huge for me. And I started looking at a lot of artists who died like in their 30s around that time. And a lot of the sentiment was, it's better to die young and beautiful. So and we have this sentiment reflected in songs, even today, where people are like, forever young, and wanting to preserve like a superficial beauty that is not the reality of what comes along with being a biological person. So that is also something that's really struck me. And I was just like, I've seen people who passed and looked peaceful. I've seen people who passed and didn't look peaceful at all. And that's another aspect that she addresses in the book is, people are going to go how they lived. So if you had somebody who, they were constantly seeking that peace and constantly having these philosophical conversations, it wasn't a surprise, then they're more likely to choose a peaceful passing.
Mhm.
If you had someone who was a rebel, who spent their whole life fighting, they may choose to go out in a more violent way if they feel like they don't have any other options.
Mm.
There's some people who like, I would just like to go out into the woods, into the wilderness, and not have to deal with, people, machinery. I just
Mhm.
want to go back to being an organic being in Mother Earth. And,
Mhm.
we put so much on the ritual of then, okay, what happens when you pass? And having this conversation of capitalism, uh, charging your family
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
exorbitant amounts of
So much
fees,
money, so
making it
much.
illegal for you to actually just like bury your dead at home. You
Mhm.
can't do that. You can't just take your loved one out and take them out to sea, depending on the location.
Well, the
Uh,
Neolithic villages that we visited, and they always buried the dead in their home, and they actually sat on top of them. And from time to time, they would dig them up and paint the bones and all that. And I mean, Day of the Dead in Mexico is not a Catholic holiday; it predates all that. So that is like one of the reasons that they're the only ones that celebrate it that way. But in Asia, there's a lot more of the you're surrounded by the spirits of the people. They don't really have a heaven and hell that people go to. They're just there with you. And through memory and imagination, you animate people and you can think of how they would respond or the advice they'd be giving you. In
Yeah, in Mexico, you celebrate past loved ones by on Day of the Dead by preparing their favorite meals and having a party and taking tequila and cigarettes and their favorite food and fruit and all these things to the cemetery and a mariachi band and partying in the cemetery and eating the food, pouring out some tequila for them and some for the and more even more for the living, and making an altar in your home of all the things that the loved one enjoyed and pictures of them and remembering them because and then there's a lot of like elements that have to be present in the altar on Day of the Dead so that the dead can come back and visit. So I think there's
Mhm.
salt, sugar, um, flower petals. There's all these elements that you have to have. And they also have a little black dog, and that is the dog that guards the. So people will have a little statue of a little dog.
I'm just having Coco, the movie, run through my mind. I think they did such a beautiful job on the representation of the culture. And for Day of the Dead, well, you made a face, India.
I didn't see it.
You haven't?
you know, but
I am so ashamed. I have
but
not seen Coco.
Be ashamed, be very ashamed.
But the thing is when you see all that ritual going on, you know that that's going to be you someday also. So you will
You will
not be
not.
forgotten,
Mhm.
and then you're passing that on. And also, there's a lot of lessons to be taught because there's stories told of like, this guy dove into a shallow pool, and you're like, so all the kids know, hey, make sure the pool is deep before you dive into it. I mean, you tell the story of how everybody came to their end, and
Yeah, there's some teachable moments
there's
there.
teachable moments in all that.
And also in the Vietnamese culture, they have set out a place setting with food at certain times of the year, or perhaps it's the person's birthday. I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that Vietnamese families will have a place setting for the people who have passed
I
at the
love that that's
table.
something that is kind of cross-cultural. There's so many cultures that have their own way of revering the dead and honoring their ancestors, whether or not it be having a consistent table where you leave offerings of incense and food, and it is common the sugar, the salt, the
and
photos.
and we're culture building creatures. I mean, we can incorporate these things today, and then 1,000 years from now, they'll say, "Oh, this is the tradition." We can make our own traditions, and that's why, like the book that you just showed of a woman interviewing the people, is setting up kind of a psychology of dying, of the people who are dying and the people who are surrounding the person, the loved one or person that is dying. And from that, you can start to derive how do you get psychological health out of this for everyone, for the person who's passing and the people who are going to go on living.
It has actually been proven that the happiest cultures in the world are cultures where they celebrate death and where death is present in the culture.
I think it's also the willingness to acknowledge that you're suffering and the willing to acknowledge pain as well. One of the more interesting things that came out of this reading for me was um, the subtle cues in which we tell people that we do not want to talk about what they're actually currently going through.
Communication skills.
Communication
Okay.
skills. So when the nurse walks in the room, or when you walk into a room and you immediately start talking about what a beautiful day it is, the communication is, I only want to talk about beautiful things. I don't want to hear about the pain that you're going through, the suffering that you're going through. I don't want to talk about difficult things right now. And so then the patient, and we're all very aware of things like trauma dumping and not being well received, having rejection. If you're in a state of dying, people are already not wanting to see you. You're isolated from friends and family, whether that be physically or emotionally. And so being aware of the language and the communication you use becomes paramount, because the world around them shrinks, which is something that she had also highlighted. She was like, someone who is on death's door probably doesn't want to talk about the political scandal that's going on, doesn't want to talk about the building that's on fire down the street, doesn't want to talk about, the fast food restaurant that's, right outside their window, possibly. Their world becomes very small and very personal. And if you're not willing to talk about personal things, and especially if you're in a professional field where everything is personal, then their options for communication become even less.
Well, and the toxicity of positivity, that phrase came to mind when you were
That's
talking.
very true. And I would say that, I always felt that I had to be positive. And that was one of the reasons why I played the music for India's Mom, because I'm always, like I say, I'm OCD, obsessively codependent. But the thing was, is that was a way that might get her to tell a story, one last story, because these are the things we're going to hold on to in with her passing, is that this is the last chance. So if I play this song and I say, well, when did you first hear this? The one that she's singing along, or did you ever play with a band with this? And she can go, oh, so and so, and he was my first boyfriend, and you know what I mean? And you get a story that's never been told before, and then that's.
It was actually perfect because, like you were saying, Kylie, it was deeply personal.
But music is not only for a mood control, but it also is for memory. And they show that, like sense, smelling is that evolution made it so that a lot of work went into developing the ability to smell, because if you're a nocturnal animal, smelling is a very big thing. You can't see that far. But when we became daytime animals, we had a lot of this area that had been dedicated to smell in our cranium. And as our smell atrophied, it opened up the place where our memories, our cerebral cortex, our frontal lobe grew into. And that's why smells can be very triggering for memories of things. And so maybe, if you ask a person, an older person, something, and then you found out the smell, and you went and cooked that meal or burned that incense or stuff, they may have a memory that would have been lost, because all those things are going to be lost with that person. So this is your last chance to learn, and it's connection. When you get somebody who shares personal stuff with you, there's love, there's love in that.
I was pretty much like a death virgin. I didn't really know many people who had died, and until I was actually in my 50s, I did not really experience death, hardly at all. Certainly not sitting at someone's deathbed, but then now that we're in our 50s, that's something we're experiencing more and more often. And death is beautiful. And I was telling you yesterday, Kylie, that I had attended several births, and I think that the deaths were very similar to attending a birth. It's a very tremendous experience. It's a very beautiful experience. One is filled with joy and one is filled with sadness, as far as the intensity and the beauty of the moment. I think they were very, very similar in that way.
If the person who's dying isn't like directly related to me, and there's all these people who are there vying for the attention and the last moments and stuff like that, I mean, I really feel like it's my job that I assume I take on, is that make sure everybody's being fed, everybody's got water, that I can comfort the people so that no one has a breakdown or, is.
Yeah, I would say during a death, one of the most important things is just keep offering everybody a glass of water.
And food, you be the one who goes and gets the food for everybody who's waiting and to talk and stuff like that.
And also people who are grieving. I don't know if she goes into that aspect of like after death, but grief is hard work and people burn a lot of calories actually crying. So I think that's the tradition, that you bring a casserole when somebody dies, right?
So it was really fascinating, the the talks of caring, the aftercare after a death, and so many holding space for so many of those emotions, and what our bodies go through, what hormones are being released with grief. She does talk about that, because she does center most of her work on the people who are dying, versus those who are left behind. Some of that is actually from the perspective of how our emotional turmoil as the ones being left behind can disrupt someone's pathway to peace in death, and the importance of the role of death doulas, as well as birthing doulas, which we've kind of come away from in modern medicine. She was like, we really shouldn't have, people that we know are dying. They shouldn't have their own wing in the hospital. They should have a different facility. Because once send them someplace where they're actually able to get the care, where they're actually able to have the conversations that they need to have. Because one of the things that she had brought up was the fact that, we as a society, and as general practice, for like the 9 to 5 hours where we know it's going to be really busy with other accidents and things like that in a hospital, tend to keep people sedated during those times. So people who are passing, really, that's why they're waking up at 2 something in the morning, and looking to have those conversations when it's quiet but there's no one around. So when they're prepared and ready to talk because they've been sedated all day, we're not able to give them the access to care that we should. Whereas if you put them in a different space where people are trained to have those conversations, to recognize the signs when somebody is ready to have those conversations as well. There was a really interesting story about a young girl, and she was going to die, and they had her in an oxygenated room, and the mom all day is just trying to play with her and distract her, and nobody's talking to her about what's going to happen. And out of the blue, at like 2 in the morning, she's talking to her nurse, and she asks the nurse what happens if there's a fire and she's in the oxygen room. Right, and the nurse was just like, oh well, like nobody smokes on this floor, that's not going to happen, and walks out. And then the realization hits her, like, no, this little girl isn't really asking about the fire in the oxygen room. The little girl is talking about what happens after this death moment, what's going to happen to me. And so she turns around and goes back into the room, and she realizes like this girl is having a really hard time. And she says, well, would me sitting here with you help? And the little girl says yes. And they proceed to have a conversation for a couple hours, where the little girl, she's finally asking about what's going to happen to her after she dies. And she's expressing the worry for her mom, and she's expressing all of these worldly connections that she's having. And at the end of the conversation, she's still lives for a couple hours after that, but she said that the demeanor had changed. And when the mom woke up and talked to her little girl, then they were having conversations of, well, mommy, like I'm going to be in the sky looking after you. So it's a difference in the facilitation of the conversations. Now they're having conversations as a family about the death, about the passing, about the memories that are going to be left behind. And I'm not going to say that it was a waste of time, but the time that you spent playing with her
Mhm.
didn't necessarily help her get to those moments. Spend time distracting from what we really need to talk about. So this book for me was mostly, don't waste time distracting yourself from what you really need to talk about.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so uh, communication is needed even more
In a high,
in the death
in an
in the
emotional
moment of
state,
death.
In
yeah.
an emotional state.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be heard. And you know, I investigated the eternal soul, and who invented it and when did it come into being. And the Egyptians had the Book of the Dead, and that like you would like die, and then you'd have to navigate this whole world and how to do it. And then there was the eternal soul, is that we only have this visual spectrum, and there's so much we can't see. And then the idea of the eternal soul was that people want there to be justice in the world. And so only if there's a soul that can be rewarded or punished at death, then can justice be, because so many people do bad things and seem to be rewarded their entire life. And it just, so what happens after we die? Well, who can say? I mean, we know that what we're experiencing, our experiences are very limited. They say that we derive our sense of right and wrong because there's a greater universal cosmic justice. And so, like, we have a sense of reality because there's a greater reality that we can't explain. So, I think it's nice how humanity has decorated the afterlife. And, like, we should decorate the afterlife based on what psychologically helps the living, helps us live through our lives and all that. And so
I wonder
the
what
great unknown,
what did the nurse tell like
well, she
when
was
the
going to be in the sky,
is that what the nurse told her, or was that the conclusion that the little girl came to?
That
Or
was the conclusion that the little girl came to. So the other
Mm.
thing that was addressed in the book is, death is like the iceberg. We have our basic fears at the
Mhm.
very tip, and then so much that lies underneath. And that's always the typical questions: where do we go after we die? What's going to happen? It's the not knowing. A lot of people said, well, some of what triggers the fear of death is it's so permanent, and it was really hilarious. I watched also a YouTube interview that she had done, where she's doing a symposium and people are giving her feedback, and everything that everyone had to say, she had an answer for. She's like, well, we do things that are permanent all the time. Back in the day, marriage used to be permanent. We get tattoos that are permanent. We make life decisions that are permanent and affect us forever all the time. So what is that? How is that any different? We go through different life stages every time. We can't go back to being 6 as much as we would want to. There's no reverse for that. We are aging. That's inevitable. So what else? And what else? And what else? And what else? And she talks about, the various different religions and all these different theories. Transference of energy. Will you be punished? Will that dictate how you live now? And all of these answers that are just very human, right? You're like, oh, it's the not knowing. It's what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? And she said, we have the language and we have the ideas. And then back to that symbolic, the 3 symbolic languages of people already having the answers to their questions, but because we have turned away from the topics of death and stopped recording them, that it's one of those, if you don't use it, you lose it type of situation. So by not speaking to people who are dying, we are cutting ourselves off from people who, and we've done some more studies with psychotropic drugs and things like DMT and LSD, which are components that already exist within our systems biologically and are triggered at birth and are highest at death. And the gateways of perceptions are opened and widened. By not having those conversations with these people, we're cutting ourselves off from our own answers, our own peace through life, and our own ways of realizing how we affect one another and how we affect ourselves.
I
Wow,
always
what a
s-
great book.
yeah.
What a
Wow.
great book.
What a
Yeah.
great book.
I
Wow.
always said I like the fact that we die because that makes the place for someone else to take their turn. I like this whole thought that we each take a turn on the planet and then we move on, because like it's a roller coaster ride of life, and if no one ever got off the roller coaster, then no one else would get to ride, and that was I like the finiteness of my time on the planet. I
It
think
Yeah.
that's
it was
great,
also a
and I
cutoff
like
for
all
joy.
I also like the seasons of
Yeah.
life. I mean, I there's things that I go, when you're living your life, you have to recognize that there's a sequencing of it, and that if you don't do things at certain times in your life, that they're only possible at those times, and there's other things that like are going to be possible when I'm older, and I just assume that I will be, and if that doesn't happen, that's okay too. But I just make sure that I prioritize and realize that, this is this part of my life now, and then this will be this part of my life now. And the real things, that um, so many people have this thing where they say, I sacrificed everything for my career, and I'm of a person who, like, I sacrifice my career for everything. And I think that that's people don't realize that they only have so much time. There's only so much time in a day, so much time in a year, so much time in a lifetime, and that you've got to make sure that you invest your time, you spend your time, not just waste it.
One of Jimmy's sayings, he always says, nobody lies on their deathbed and says, "Oh, I wish I had spent more time at work."
I love
I
that.
wish I had spent more time in a traffic jam.
I wish I spent more time in my car, sitting
Yeah.
outside of my house.
India says that she wanted to sue LA for like kidnapping, for having her stuck in traffic for 3 hours one time. She's like,
Hostage.
Yeah,
I was
this is-
held
has held you
hostage in Los
hostage.
Angeles one time in a traffic jam.
she says, "Can I sue? Because this was all against my will."
I think something that was so pertinent about what you had said earlier was the stages of life, the seasons of life, and if we lived forever, how miserable we would be.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are creatures of habit, but also if the seasons don't change, and Elizabeth had actually, mentioned this when she had gone to Florida and noticed that the people there who were used to walking along the beaches and were used to having access to the fruit that was there and used to the sunshine just didn't care anymore. They were taking it for granted. They're inside doing whatever. They're working. They're focused on their careers. Whereas, she steps off the plane and she's coming from someplace in Europe that has a very long winter and it was cold and crotchety, and she's just like, oh my gosh, sunshine, and all I want to do is like pick the oranges and lay on the beach and just take it all in and appreciate the sunsets and the fresh breeze, new environment. And she's like, that's impossible if you think it's going to last forever. And
Mhm.
also, would you marry if you thought that you were going to literally, quite literally, be with the same person forever? So many people, she said, this is also the fallacy of human beings, of people who are highly religious as well, of not truly
Recognizing the reality of life.
reality
Mhm.
that
Of the thing that they think they want.
the thing
Like-
that they think they want. Do you really want this everlasting, or is it acceptable because you know that it's not?
Well, and Buddha said that, it's the impermanence of life that causes all this suffering, is that people want things to be permanent and it can't be, and so they suffer. And the truth is that Kyle Gibran was always like, the deeper the valleys, the higher the mountains. So you can't be happy all the time either. You have to be sad to know it, to recognize how fortunate happiness is, or embrace the suffering, realize that it's part of life, and that's the exciting part of it, is that you get this full spectrum of experience and emotion.
Like they said in Wayne's World, I hate change.
Yeah, I embrace change. I mean, change is one of those things that is that's variety is the spice of life.
I think it shows also in how you both have chosen to live. Even down to the very fabric that you sell. It's all you can intentionally put pigment into a fabric and have an idea for how the design is going to turn out, but the reality is the colors bleed and they create their own patterns, and it's probably not going to come out exactly as you have it pictured in your mind, and that is what makes each piece unique and beautiful. It's like there's a philosophy behind that.
Well, and mine of pursuing tie-dye and was that I get to meet people, and they come into my booth and they buy different pieces, and then my tagline has been guaranteed to bring good thoughts when you wear them. And so many people come back and say, your guarantee of that this shirt will make me happy. I mean, they never get the tagline right. It's guaranteed to bring good thoughts when you wear them. But they say that they open their dresser drawers. And my idea is that you can attach these kind of things, catchphrases, to anything. You
But it's
say,
an emotion. It's a feeling. It's not the phrase. It's the feeling.
It's not the fabric, it's the feeling.
Yes.
Right. And it's amazing that it works, because I just know that those things work for me. There's, you have your favorite, when you're a kid, you have a blanket, and it's your comfort blanket. And when you have that blanket, you feel comfortable. And that's because somebody told you, hey, this is your blankie, and you're safe when you're wrapped in it. And, psychologically, you got to set up like all these little tricks to keep yourself in a positive state and feeling safe.
I love that. I extend that to people. I treat every person as if they're my comfort person, and so far it's pretty much worked. Unless there's an issue of also the honesty. I think a lot of people don't want to talk about what's really going on, and I'm very much so you're feeling this today.
Very good.
And
Very
they
Selwa.
may not want to why do you know that I'm feeling that way? What is it about me that's letting you know, like, that's not what I was intending to project, that maybe that's not what I even wanted to talk about, how dare you? And sometimes you get very different reactions with
I've seen you do it.
I've seen you do it when it works, though.
Yeah. I've seen you get very positive responses. We talk to checkers and we talk to everybody that we come in contact with and treat them like a human being, but never as a...
Just as if they were.
Yeah, as if they were, because they are. Like, you come up to a person at the gas station and, because we spend all our time in cars. So, and you say, how are you doing today? And they're like, or you just ask somebody who's in a situation and you figure, wow, do you deal with a lot of upset people here? And they're like, I do. And you're like, so tell me a story tell me a funny story about somebody. And they'll just be like, thank you for doing that. You know what I mean? Just triggering them where they're just kind of in their mode of accomplishing whatever they're getting paid to do and nothing more. And it's just great to connect with their humanity. It's really easy. I think it's full circle. You talked about communication. I talked about how do we have an environment that facilitates personal relationships and community involvement. And then you talked about the truth of that all our lives are finite.
It's final.
And
you better make your connections and put in the effort now.
So, I mean, if those three things were implemented as social priorities, that, everybody was taught communication skills in grade school, and everybody was building an environment in which we were going to facilitate closer relationships. And then everybody had the realization that, this is a one-offer, you're...
It makes it more
and it has
precious.
seasons.
It makes it more precious being
Yeah.
a one-off,
Yeah, but the thing is, it's never over. There's so many people I meet that live a life of regret. And I used to say, those who dwell on the past enter the future butt first, tripping over cracks they would have seen if they'd have just turned around. And it's never the whole, forget regret, is that you have it all in front of you now. And that's what you can do, and that's where you're at. You're going to regret the time you spent regretting,
I love it. India, do you have any last notes for this episode before we give our love to AMP for allowing us to facilitate these conversations?
Exactly. No, I think I'm in this sort of, except that I think I'm experiencing the deep satisfaction that comes from having an honest conversation about death. And I think I'm sort of, I don't know, I'm feeling really at peace right now because of the topics that we talked about today, and because we were so honest about life. And that's why cultures that embrace death and make death a part of everyday life are much happier cultures.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm sort of feeling that right now.
I think I'm having a
I'm vibing
happier
that right
day
now,
because
yeah.
I've embraced death
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is that we have a lot of older friends, and we met them when they were in their 60s, and now we've had them as friends for decades. And it's sad to think that we won't have them forever, but it's just so incredible to have had them for so long. And I look forward to meeting. We never miss a chance to go visit and drive out of the way, because you only get so much time on the planet, and you can kind of control who you hang out with.
I love that. I think that's also one of those like life lessons to have and be had, to cherish those moments. So I think we're at a good wrapping up point. Once again, thank you so much, AMP, for allowing us to, have a place to express ourselves and to utilize that communication and to utilize those social tools and to have honest conversations. So thank you. It's been a wonderful episode.
Thank you, Kylie.
Yo.
Thank you, India.
Oh, thank you all. I appreciate.
Can we do this show forever?
I know. I appreciate you guys very much, but it has to come to an end.